In these perilous times, see from current events how biblical prophecy is coming to pass in front of our eyes. You're watching In the Last Days, the program that looks at Israel and the end times with teaching from a Hebraic perspective. With Martin and Natalie Blackham. Thank you to our friends and partners who make this program possible. Now, here's Martin and Natalie.
Hi, welcome to the In the Last Days television program with myself, Martin Blackham. Natalie's behind the scenes today. It's great to welcome you wherever you're watching across the United Kingdom, into Europe, and by way of internet, or in India, or wherever in the United States. Wherever you're watching, we welcome you. Great to have you with us. And don't forget, you can email us at info@inthelastdays.com and send us your questions and views. Now, if you were watching the program last week, you will have seen that we had a special guest in the studio, Dr. Martin Sherman, and we've got Dr. Martin in again. Great to have you with us. Thank you so much for coming across to join us. Dr. Martin Sherman is originally from South Africa, has lived in Israel since 1971. He served for 7 years in operational capacities in the Israeli defense establishment, was a ministerial advisor to Yitzhak Shamir's government. He lectured for 20 years at Tel Aviv University in political science, international relations, and strategic studies. He's authored 2 books. He's a writer for the Jerusalem Post. Many of you will be familiar with his column in the Jerusalem Post. He's spoken on the BBC, CNN, I24 News, and Israel National News. He's the founder and CEO of the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies. Now, it might be sometime during the program we might be able to even touch on that, Martin, if we have time. And he's one of Israel's foremost strategic policy analysts and a strong supporter of an independent Jewish state. So it's really a privilege for us to have you in the studio today and to be able to talk to our viewers about what's going on. Now, we were just finishing the program last week and talking about the issue of right-wing governments being elected, and many of our viewers will have been excited at the election of Benjamin Netanyahu being right-wing, and our viewers supporting that on the basis of a greater Israel and the state of Israel being more established. And what we find is that there in fact are more problems, and we were talking a little bit about that last week, so maybe we can continue to examine that for a minute.
Yeah, well, if I remember correctly, we ended the program talking about the limousine theory. The limousine theory is very important because if you don't understand the limousine theory, you can't understand many of the most important processes that have taken place over the last 2 decades, two decades and a half. You can't, for instance, understand why Israel shows such brilliance in matters of matters tactical and technological, and such imbecility in matters strategic. You can't understand why right-wing governments, hawkish governments, consistently win elections, and on being elected, adopt the failed policies of their dovish and left-wing rivals. You can't understand why the policy of land for peace, which has failed miserably, has not really been, has been disproven, but has never really been discredited and certainly never discarded. These are the sort of things that you can't explain. In fact, one of the things that you can't explain is why Israel hasn't embraced far more enthusiastically the support it gets across the Christian world. These things raise serious question marks. And they can only be understood if you really understand the limousine theory. And I said, why the limousine theory? Because in a limousine you have a driver in official uniform and a smart cap who holds the wheel and sometimes turns it left and sometimes turns it right. Sometimes he speeds up, sometimes he slows down, sometimes he changes lanes. And so the uninformed observer might think he's in control, but he isn't, because you can change the driver. And you may change the style of driving slightly, you may even change the route a little bit, but you won't change the destination. The same way as no matter who you elect in Israel, the destination remains the same, the 2-state solution based on the failed land for peace doctrine. And the reason is because the destination is determined by the backseat occupants. And the backseat occupants in this case are not the elected politicians, but civil society elites, a trinity of civil society elites, who interact and feed each other. This is composed of the people who control the legal establishment, the people who control the mainstream media, and the people who control a large part of the academia, mainly social sciences and humanities. Now, these people have, because of their unelected positions of power and privilege, can impose on the elected politicians, it doesn't matter who gets elected, a policy which is completely divergent from the policy that was promised the voters, and sometimes diametrically opposed to the policy that was promised the voters. The people in the legal establishment...
Ariel Sharon's a very good example
exactly.
of that.
Yeah, but even Rabin. Rabin was the hawkish Palmachnik, the hero of the Six-Day War, who opposed negotiations with the PLO and eventually gave us Oslo. And even to a certain extent Benjamin Netanyahu, who was elected on a platform of opposing a Palestinian state, and his famous or infamous Bar Ilan speech embraced a Palestinian state, albeit within certain unrealistic reservations. But he, in a stroke, he changed the strategic structure of the debate from whether there should be a Palestinian state or not to what the characteristics of the state should be.
And it's probably fair to say that most of the government would only be in their place if they agree to that, publicly, that they say that they agree to a two-state solution.
Well, once you've declared that policy, yes, but none of them, at least up to the election before last, none of them were elected on that platform. They were elected on the opposite platform. But just going back to what I was saying before, these elites have both the ability and the motivation to impose their own agenda on the politicians. What's the ability? The people who control the legal establishment can prevent any assertive action being taken by the politicians, like, for instance, cutting off electricity to Gaza so there won't be power that drives the lathes that machine the rockets that they fire at us. The people in the mainstream media can initiate any concessionary initiative, as they did with Oslo, as they did with the disengagement, where they wrapped Arik Sharon in cotton wool until the measures were taken, and with the Gilad Shalit release as well, which a week after he was released, some people who supported it before were saying it was a grave mistake, which is gross hypocrisy. But the whole Shalit release was a media-driven event, and when they want the stamp of approval that what's been undertaken is far-sighted statesmanship rather than short-sighted myopia, they go to the professors in the university who give their professional stamp to it. Now, this is what drives the process. Now, the question is, what about their motivation? These elites have a set of personal and professional interests that are served far better by embracing the Palestinian narrative than by adopting the Zionist narrative. If you're a senior person in the Israeli legal establishment and you write an article or hand down a decision or a verdict, it's far more important to you for your career what they say about you at the law school at Harvard or at Yale or some other prestigious campus than what they say on the streets of Tel Aviv. If you're a prominent social scientist and you want to raise resources for a study, or if you want to get it published in a prestigious journal, you've got far more chance of doing that if you express concern for Palestinian suffering rather than concern for Israeli security. If you're a leading person in the media and you want to be the main speaker at some prestigious event, you've got much more chance of being invited if you're going to be sympathetic to the Palestinians than empathetic to the Zionists. And so the ability on the one hand and the motivation on the other hand of these elites drives the agenda. It doesn't matter who gets in it. And unless that can be addressed, it doesn't matter who you elect. To try and address this through the political system is a little like someone standing in a bucket and trying to lift themselves up by the handle. You have to have external point of leverage, which in this case means building alternative competing elites who can neutralize and eventually replace these elites in the backseat of the limousine.
And do you think there's the nationalist movement is moving forward, or is it on the fringes and isn't really getting to the heart of the matter?
Well, it depends what you mean by the nationalist movement. Unfortunately, in Israel, you have a very similar syndrome to what you have in the United States. You have a delusional left and an incompetent right, and because the right is incompetent, it can't thwart the delusions of the left, and that's what you see basically in both countries. If you were to compare Yitzhak Rabin's last address to the Knesset, to the Israeli Parliament, after he'd won the Nobel Peace Prize, and after he'd been hailed as a valiant warrior for peace, and in his address he was seeking parliamentary ratification for Oslo II. If Benjamin Netanyahu today was to embrace verbatim what Rabin set out as his vision for the permanent solution with the Palestinians, he would be dismissed as an unrealistic extremist. So you can see the erosion there's been in Israel, in Israel's position. And that's despite the fact that organization, if you look at the organizational tags in parliamentary representation, the right wing is much stronger. So right-wing victories in the polls are basically irrelevant for the substantive outcomes on the ground. And so, when you say the nationalist movement has progressed, it's progressed in terms of numbers. In my opinion, it's regressed in terms of its impact.
And it's interesting because, a lot of our viewers who are watching, Martin, will be pro-Zionist, a lot of them will be Christian Zionists, and a lot of them will be interested in seeing Israel expand, not contract, and even with Judea and Samaria. They would see that, and yet we see the kind of Zionist movement, which we would imagine in Israel is the major movement of Israel, but it just seems that it's on the fringes. It doesn't seem to be able to make any.
It doesn't have the impact because basically, as I said, the right wing in Israel has addressed the wrong issues, and it's let the left wing hijack the agenda. In many ways, this is the failure of right-wing philanthropy. Right-wing activists are busy with all sorts of things that are noble and worthwhile, but they won't affect the agenda at all. And unless you can build up intellectual centers that can win the intellectual ideological battle, it doesn't matter what you do on the ground. And that was the startling lesson of Gaza, because despite the fact that the vast majority of Likud members opposed the disengagement, Arik Sharon pushed it through. And the fact that there were millions of dollars of donors' money in synagogues and in sports recreation centers and clinics, they were all wiped off the face of the earth within 2 weeks because they didn't have ideological shields. And unless you can build up ideological shields, have a right-wing hawkish rationale which can capture the mainstream in Israel, the battle will be lost. It doesn't matter who gets elected, because as long as the left wing control the discourse, they don't need to be a majority to control the discourse. So long as they control the discourse, they will control policies, because the discourse determines the decision maker's perceptions of the constraints and possibilities that are facing him. And unless you can control the decision maker's perceptions of those constraints and those possibilities, you won't control policy. And what the left wing has done, because it's invested in mechanisms for promoting agendas, whilst the right wing is invested in things like real estate, houses, land, charities, fire engines, ambulances, etc., which are all very noble, but they mean nothing in terms of winning the ideological battle. And unless there's a massive switch of funds for the kind of philanthropic activity that the right-wing benefactors engage in, they'll lose the battle. And it's coming pretty late to the point of no return, because you can buy thousands of properties for Jews in East Jerusalem, But if there's a decision, a political decision, to divide the city, it won't matter who's got legal title to the assets, because the successor regime will either let the Jews keep their property or it'll confiscate it. It's got nothing to do with the political outcome. Unless you can win the strategic, ideological, intellectual battle, facts on the ground will mean nothing, as the Gaza episode showed.
If you've just joined us, we've got Dr. Martin Sherman in the studio today, and maybe we can talk a bit about that, Martin, because from what you were saying about your organisation, the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies, is that one of its goals? Is to address this very serious issue in the Israeli academia?
Yes,
and,
yes. You know, to be realistic, it's not an organisation that can accomplish the goal by itself, but it can be a catalyst and a nucleus around which countervailing elites can coalesce, and a banner around which they can, the hitherto hesitant can rally, because the kind of challenges that Israel is facing today can only really be addressed by big government money. You know, last week we talked about how poorly Israel presents its case. The truth of the matter is that Israel is losing the battle for hearts and minds across the world for a reason that's very simple, very difficult to accept, but very easy to prove. And Israel's losing the battle because it doesn't want to win. Now, how do you know it doesn't want to win? If you want to measure the motivation of an organization to achieve a certain objective, one of the most important criteria is the amount of resources that it allots to achieve that objective. Now, if you look at Israel's public diplomacy budget, it's laughable. It's literally less than what a medium to large size company spends on promoting fast foods and snacks. So if you're not investing in conveying your message, why would you expect it to be conveyed? You know, and it's not that there are no resources. If Israel were to invest 1% of state budget, 1% of state budget is $1 billion. $1 billion, you can change a lot of minds, you can impact a lot of people. You know, and what's happening, especially in the United States, is we're losing the younger generation because no effort is made to bring Israel's case assertively and confidently on the campuses. If you had a $100 million campaign, what's $100 million for Israel? It's nothing, really nothing. You know, it's 1/10 of 1% of the state budget. You could change minds tremendously. You know, now I say this personally from the experience that I've had on campuses and courses that I've lectured at American universities. And the reason that this is not being done is because Israel can't present its case forcefully without undermining the worldview of the elites we talked about before. Because if you present Palestinian society as it really is, which is basically a cruel, brutal society, it makes no sense to set up a Palestinian state on the fringes of your international airport and on the length of your Trans-Israel highway. So you can't present the Palestinians as they really are. So given the stranglehold that these elites have on Israeli public diplomacy, it has to be ineffective. Because if it were effective, it would undermine their own worldview, which is embracing the Palestinian narrative and promoting a Palestinian state and endorsing land for peace. So this is and unless this can be addressed, nothing will help. You can elect Arik Sharon, the super ultra hawk, and you get unilateral withdrawal. You can elect Yitzhak Rabin, you know, the gruff, hawkish Palmachnik, and you get Oslo. You can elect Benjamin Netanyahu, the great white hope, and you get recognition of a Palestinian state. And so it doesn't matter who you elect. It's not a matter it's not a personal matter. It's a structural matter. And unless you can change the structure, the personalities are irrelevant.
And it's interesting because Israel's been in a war in Gaza, not just with rockets being fired at the Israeli population, but there's a media war to explain what's actually going on there. And although many of our viewers may be aware that Hamas is a terrorist organization, there was some, I saw one particular debate, I think it was on YouTube, where it was a BBC debate where the chaps were referring to them as if they're some sort of normal population being shot at, and they haven't explained at all anything about the cruelty of Hamas. This wasn't explained at all, and yet it seems like Israel's in this media war and completely on the back foot with the whole thing.
No, I entirely agree with you, and the flaw in Israeli thinking is that, you know, they try to explain ongoing events, but that's a mistake. You have to set the context on which those events are interpreted. For instance, if a civilian is killed, it makes a big difference whether the context is Israel is an avaricious, aggressive, land-grabbing, powerful nation, or whether Israel is a valiant democracy surrounded by a sea of tyranny and theocracy, trying to defend democratic values. Now, it makes a big difference against which background and in which context you interpret a given event, the death of a civilian. Because in the one case, you know, it's unacceptable aggression. In the other case, it's regrettable but unavoidable collateral damage. And the failing of Israeli public diplomacy is not in explaining ongoing events or spinning any given occurrence. It's setting the context in which those events are interpreted. And you can't set that context effectively as long as the policy is in control of civil society elites who lean more to the Palestinian narrative than they do to the Zionist narrative.
If you've just tuned in, we've got Dr. Martin Sherman in the studio today. And one of the things we talked about last week, and I think it's very important that we look at it again. I know that it will be of a lot of great use to you watching today, was about the defendable borders. And I think it's something startling, really, and maybe we can just have a quick look at that. The facts of the two-state solution, which many people may, you know, think is a good idea, but it's just not workable, is it? With losing all of Israel's border.
Well, the two-state solution is a certain recipe for disaster. You know, even if you happen to believe that you have a sincere Palestinian partner, there's no way that you can ensure that once he signed the agreement, he'll either honor it, but even if he does honor it, that he won't be replaced. And again, you know, this is not sort of idle speculation. It's happened in Gaza, and with the growing ascendancy of ISIS and other jihadi elements across the Muslim and the Arab world, the survivability of moderate and reasonable regimes is decreasing rapidly. We've seen them displaced in Libya. We've seen even in Tunis, which was the poster, was the poster case or the poster boy of the Arab Spring, is slowly declining into Islamic rule. You can see what's happened in Syria. And even in Egypt, you know, the Muslim Brotherhood may be down, but it's not out, and who knows how long the Sisi regime can maintain power. So you have this growing ascendancy of Islamic radicalism across the world, which make the establishment of a moderate Palestinian state even more tenuous. Because, for instance, if Jordan were to fall, or even come under the influence of a radical regime, you would have this massive tract of land being controlled by Islamic extremists. And people need to understand how important strategically the land allotted for the Palestinian state is. Because, you know, as I mentioned last week, from the limestone hills that comprise this area, that overlook the coastal plain, you control virtually every strategic installation and system within Israel, within the pre-67 borders, whether that's airfields, military and civilian, including the only international airport, which would be in mortar range of the border. If it means seaports and naval bases, whether it's a land transport system, road and rail, whether it's power conveyance or power generation and the water system, whether it's centers of government and military command, and 80% of the population and 80% of the activity. All of these will be ranged, the weapons that have been used against Israel from territory that's been relinquished to Arab rule in the past. So the burden of proof, in my opinion, is no longer on people who oppose a Palestinian state, but for people who support it, because there's no guarantee that the situation will be viable. People, there are all sorts of alternative solutions which people ask, what happens if it doesn't work? But what happens if the Palestinian state doesn't work? If the two-state solution doesn't work? Let's suppose you go for it. What's plan B? What's plan B after your moderate peace partner has been replaced by a jihadi extremist? What do? Do you retake the territory? What about the casualties, both civilian and military, and civilian casualties on the Palestinian side?
And Gaza is a good example of that.
Sure,
of a territory which Israel was controlling and released, and now is in the hands of Islamic extremists.
Yes, but as we mentioned last week, the Gaza War showed what the significance is of a short 50-kilometer border abutting the sparsely populated rural south. Now you can only imagine what with no topographical superiority. Now imagine that you have a 500-kilometer border with Israel in an inferior topographical position, abutting your heavily populated urban center, with your airport within mortar range and your main highway within tunnel range.
They're going to have to look at your website, Martin, now. If you want to learn more, you have to go and visit Dr. Martin Sherman's website. Great to have you with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Very, very interesting. And thank you for coming across to be with us today. If you'd like to email us, don't forget you can email us at info@inthelastdays.com. And remember, we're living in the last days.
You've been watching In the Last Days, a TV program with Martin and Natalie Blackham, the program that looks at Israel and the end times with teaching from a Hebraic perspective. If you would like to financially support the program or find out about conferences, meetings, or ministry products, then please contact us with the details on your screen. Visit our easy-to-use website at www.inthelastdays.com and register for our free e-newsletter. Get the latest news from Israel, product information, online video teaching, or watch today's TV program at a time that's convenient to you. Thank you again, friends and partners, for making this program possible.
See you same time, same station for the next program from In the Last Days.